title is Navigating the Path to DevOps Maturity in the Real World. And today's presenters include Michael Faithmeyer, who's VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester, Sunil Pillai, Director at InfraStretch Labs, and Brian Dawson, who is the DevOps Evangelist at Cloudbased. Welcome to all of you, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Michael, why don't you go ahead and we'll start with you. If you could just kind of introduce yourself to the audience and give us a little information about yourself.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining today, and thanks for having me. As mentioned, my name is Mike Faithmeyer. I'm the analyst at Forrester that covers digital experience delivery, and so that is web, mobile, IoT, connected devices. All of these things that companies are using to build their digital experience. My background is I'm a computer engineer. I'm a developer. I still write code. So a lot of the challenges that we'll talk about today, I've had the fortune or misfortune of living through myself.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Sunil, tell us about yourself, please.
Sure. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Director for InfraStretch Labs at InfraStretch. InfraStretch Labs is responsible for various innovation initiatives for the industry, which covers mobile and especially around DevOps. So my responsibility is to kind of lead those initiatives and also lead the DevOps practice at InfraStretch. And my background is heavily in software engineering, mobile, DevOps, and I cannot be more excited to be here today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sunil. And Brian, please tell us about yourself.
Hello. Again, thanks everybody for joining. I'm Brian Dawson. I'm a DevOps Evangelist with Cloudbased. Cloudbased is often known as the Enterprise Jenkins Company. We are major contributors to the Jenkins project, as well as we offer enterprise scale solutions for Jenkins. I come to this role in this webinar by way of years of software development with a focus on optimizing the software development process on the planes of technical, process, or people. And most recently, I've been a continuous integration, continuous delivery, and DevOps consultant.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead and advance the slide.
So today, what we're going to cover, and I hope you guys find value in, is first we'll hear from Mike, and he'll discuss research that Forrester has done in analyzing the software market or the technology markets today, and how continuous delivery and DevOps play a role in those markets. I'll then introduce a simplified four-quadrant model for measuring your DevOps maturity. We'll then talk about some of the hurdles that you encounter when trying to implement DevOps, and we'll put those in the context of a real-world enterprise CD implementation that was done at a large financial software company, to be revealed later. And then Sunil will discuss how you apply the Four Quadrants model to facilitate implementation of DevOps in the real world. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, thanks all. Thanks for joining. I actually enjoyed how Brian said he'd spend a good part of his career optimizing the software development patterns and software development lifecycle. I'll tell you that as I talk to clients today and do research, our clients and the development organizations within our client shops are evolving, and it's kind of a forced evolution. As I mentioned, I cover a lot of the digital experience development and creation space, and that evolution is forced because we are now having to build things for web, for mobile, for IoT, for Alexa. Some folks are building for cars. A lot of folks are building for the machines that make their businesses work. And this is a far reach from what we used to have to do. When I was building software professionally, we built websites, and the only thing we had to worry about was one web browser versus another. So things like IE6, we had to worry about if IE6 was going to work, and that was the biggest challenge that we had. But now it's how do we make sure that we have a consistent experience across all of these devices and across all of our different lines of business. And this is what's forcing the evolution of our organizations. And so as I talk to them, one of the biggest challenges they have is how do we keep up with the pace? Because the question that I get so often, or the demand I get, is how do we build things quickly? And in my career, we started out once upon a time, and that once upon a time for many folks isn't that long ago, where the overall software development lifecycle was roughly 12 to 18 months long. And that afforded us an opportunity to have design take their time and do their job and their role, and then kind of throw it over the wall to development, and then development does their thing and throws it over the wall to QA. QA throws it over the wall to ops, and then ops to kind of APM and production monitoring. And that all took 12 to 18 months. Well, now when we talk to stakeholders and we talk to customers, they want this software delivered in a 2 to 4 month time frame. And so moving from 12 to 18 months down to 2 to 4 months screams for optimization and screams for efficiency. Now it screams for that, but what a lot of folks simply do is they just cut off the parts that fall outside of that 4 month. And so if they're able to do design and some of development in 4 months, well then that's when they stop and they push to market. And unfortunately that doesn't work, because both your customers and your employees still have this understanding of quality, and they still want these experiences to look and work well. Now this trend isn't stopping. We're still moving towards this zero-day event for software, where your customers or your business stakeholders are going to come to us and say, I have an idea for something, can I have it now? Or can I have it this week? And if the answer is no, there are so many other opportunities for them to get that, something close to what they need or close enough. And so we need to work on optimizing how we build software. And that's where I spend a lot of my time researching here at Forrester. Now, we also have a ton of data, and this is some very, very recent data that we have based on a survey that we run every year. We asked folks, how often does your team release applications? And if you look here in the middle, the one release per month is going up. And so, 2 years ago in 2014, about 1 out of every 5 shops were releasing once a month, and now we're up to about one every 4 shops, or 1 shop out of every 4 are releasing once a month. And that's a lot different than that 12 to 18 month life cycle. So can you release 1 time a month? And a lot of folks, the answer is no. And so they ask me, do I need to blow up my organization and build it again? And that's quite extreme. And the answer to that is no. We can optimize within what you already have. There are tools and technologies and processes to enable you to do this. A couple other really neat pieces of data. The one release a week is actually going down. So folks realize, once a week might be great for that brand new startup in the Valley or startup in the Bay Area, but for a lot of folks, once a month seems to be the sweet spot that we're landing on. And then if we go industry by industry, financial services and insurance, we mentioned we've got a case study coming up on that here in a few minutes. Nearly half the shop, or actually a little bit more than half the shops in there in the financial services and insurance industry release once a month or faster. So this is kind of the goal that we're looking at. How do we build our process so that we can go once a month or faster? And a great example here is Netflix. Netflix had a need to be able to deliver their entertainment, deliver their content to a world of devices, because they have to handle not only web browsers and desktops and mobile devices, but they also have to handle game devices, televisions with extremely low memory and an extremely constrained development space. And so they now have a have a presence on over 200 devices. And I love this quote from Reed Hastings, their CEO. They said, "We realize we learn best by getting in the market and then learning, even if we're less than perfect." And so it's that idea, it's that mantra of how do we build something that still has quality, but we can get into the market quickly and then quickly iterate. This is kind of the marching order that we are now given as we build software. And so then what does that actually look like? You know, what are the big challenges here? The biggest one that I come across is this. We have all these disparate back-end data stores that we need to provide access to, whether it's your CRM system, your content management, your directory servers. All these things have different data. They're different types of data. And then we have to deliver them on all of these disparate and different front ends. And the types of front ends seem to be exploding every day. We have the mobile devices in the web that we still deliver on. And now we're seeing an explosion of chat platforms, things like Facebook Messenger and WeChat, and even iMessage coming out. We have things like the Amazon Echo, and how do we deliver an experience on that keeps up with the expectations that we've established with all these other channels. And then finally, things like the mobile platforms themselves. How do we integrate with Siri and Google Now and Cortana, all of these things. And so there's this disparate array of front-end things that we have to deliver on. And so the true challenge here is how do we bridge these two? And this is just development. This doesn't speak to the entire software development lifecycle. We still have design and QA and ops. And so how do we address this challenge that we see here, as well as the other individual discipline challenges, and then make them all work together and come together well so that we release software on that cadence that we've seen before. This is what we're starting to see. We're starting to see a change in the modern software lifecycle. And you see down in the bottom right, I've highlighted in this diagram whose fingers are in that part of the discussion, or who's the heavy influence in that piece of the discussion. So initially, when we define the objectives that we need for a digital experience, that's heavily reliant on the business. We see a little bit of dev in there, but it's mostly the business that's defining that. Then we start to see both business and development establish a success criteria. What does success look like for this digital experience? We then, within development, create a minimum viable product. That minimum viable product is put into the market, and through operations and things like APM and the analytics that we've built into this product, we quantify the feedback we get from our experience. And that quantified feedback is important because in the past, we would put software out with no analytics and no real feedback mechanisms. But today, with mobile and the web and Alexa, by definition, by platform design, we have mechanisms by which our customers and users can give us feedback. And so we need to quantify that feedback so that we can then align that feedback with the KPIs and success criteria that we established in step 2. And you see here, we have heavy influence from all 3 parts of both business development and operations. And then we rinse and repeat. And so what we're seeing here is not that we need to tell developers to build things faster or tell dev and ops to get together and magically solve this DevOps challenge, but instead our business, our entire business, including development, including the lines of business, need to be on the same page such that this software lifecycle is inclusive of them all, but can also perform efficiently. And that efficiency means let's get rid of the friction between each of the disciplines of the SDLC and the friction between the SDLC and the rest of the business. So with that in mind, what does this all mean? What are we seeing coming out of this? Number one, the digital experience creation is getting more complex, yet the demands on time to market are getting shorter. And so we have to build more in a shorter period of time. That's number one. Number two, normalization across the entire SDLC is a must. And this can only be done by eliminating friction between disciplines and between our software organizations and the business as well. And finally, this modern development lifecycle is changing. Adapting to this at scale is really the big challenge. And what do we mean by scale? That means not only do we have to do this for more than one experience, but we also have to do this for more than one line of business within an organization, and we have to do this within IT. And so it's an M by N by X type matrix that gets more and more complex with every new front-end channel, but also gets more and more complex with every part of the business that starts to create experiences that help define our overall company's digital experience and what we deliver to customers and employees. And so that's what I see right now in the industry as the biggest challenge we have. So with that in mind, with that kind of framework, let me pass it over to Brian from Cloudbased to talk about what they're doing and what they're seeing in the market as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Before I sort of kick off into my piece, I did want to highlight the fact that you called out that when we talk DevOps is not just about Dev and Ops, but as you said, removing friction through all parts of the process, but not only the core development and delivery process, but also with the business. So we'll talk a bit to that by reviewing a simplified model for describing, defining, and driving your path to DevOps maturity. This model came into play because, as demonstrated by Mike, there's a lot of complexity in starting and succeeding in a DevOps journey so that you can deliver better software faster. It crosses silos, it crosses lines of business, and ideally scales across your entire organization. What I have found in my experience is that oftentimes that complexity creates misalignment, creates additional friction, and ultimately contributes to the failure of one to achieve their goals sought through DevOps. So, through my practice and our practice at Cloudbased in collaboration with InfoStretch, we've tried to simplify the problem space around the DevOps journey into a 4 quadrants maturity model. So again, you could define and describe where you're at, and then ultimately start from a high-level perspective before you drill down. So to provide a little more context to this model, before I actually step into it, I want to talk a bit about the components of DevOps. So DevOps, and I am sorry for jumping back and forth. There's an expected component missing. So as Mike highlighted with the Netflix quote, to paraphrase, they discovered that it was better to deliver and then learn from what they've delivered, which you guys may identify really as an agile principle, right? We want to deliver fast to get feedback from the customer early so we can correct, reduce waste, and increase value. And this speaks to the overall definition of DevOps, which I like to describe as a culture that you subscribe to and aspire to, which is supported by practices and technology. And to highlight this, if we look at the components of it, if you're going to implement a DevOps solution, you need to focus on getting a continuous flow from the upstream development, which is on the left-hand side, to downstream delivery, which is on the right-hand side. So we need to be able to go from definition, plan, and code to release, deploy, and monitor in short cycle times. To achieve this, we deploy practices such as agile or incremental project planning and execution, continuous integration of the changes that we make, so again we can find problems fast and correct them more easily with less expense, extension of those continuous integration practices further into the lifecycle via continuous delivery, and for some select companies, they also seek to and successfully achieve continuous deployment where changes are deployed as soon as they are made. I think it's important to note that not all companies need to implement continuous delivery to achieve DevOps. Rather, if it's not a fit for your technology and if it's not a fit for a customer, then you don't need to feel the need to achieve it, but you should achieve continuous delivery to ensure that your software is always ready for release. And once you've done this, you're able to make rapid changes, get user feedback in a production environment, including bugs, feature responses, etc., performance, incorporate that in your change management process, and iterate on changes rapidly. So let's take a look at the market. So market data indicates that only 33% of organizations have implemented Agile upstream. And what this means is they've adopted iterative or lean project planning and execution practices and or adopted fast modern development approaches such as continuous integration. Now, if we look at who has been able to scale that, only 22% of organizations have managed to successfully scale those practices across the enterprise, so they're getting those benefits across multiple teams. Moreover, and where we start to see what we need to focus on, is only 13% of organizations have managed to connect their upstream, agile upstream development processes with agile downstream delivery processes. And for these organizations that haven't implemented this, what you're going to find is that they're not truly seeing the value of being able to define, plan, code, and build software more quickly because they're not able to get it out to market via an agile delivery process such that they can get that fast feedback. Now, if we look at the upper right-hand space, we find by triangulating data that roughly only 10% of organizations claim to have achieved enterprise CD or DevOps. And that is where they've crossed the chasm from agile upstream to agile downstream and connected those and then managed to scale those across their entire organization and codify them as standard practices. And one may ask, if it's only 10% there, why do we care? Why do we want to get there? Well, companies like Netflix have proven that if you're able to deliver faster at enterprise scale, as Mike noted, across 200 platforms, then you can innovate faster, you can respond to the market in terms of competitor advantage, security notifications, bugs, or any market conditions, and this allows you to maintain or gain competitive advantage. It's also been seen that we're able to not only increase quality of software, but we're able to increase the productivity of the teams that deliver that software, and ultimately that results in us being able to maintain and gain top talent by ensuring that we have satisfied employees, and that cyclically contributes to our productivity, our quality, and ultimately our competitive advantage. So this is why we want to get there. Well, if there's so much value that has been proven in getting there, why aren't we there? Well, first, I'd like to highlight what I call the Trinity, the DevOps Trinity. The DevOps Trinity consists of people and culture, process and practices, tools and technology. And to achieve continuous flow from upstream development to downstream delivery, it requires that you establish flow on the planes of DevOps Trinity all the way from define to operate or concept to customer. But in most organizations, there's an inherent problem with this based on the way that we sort of defined our legacy practices and culture, right? There is a chasm or a disconnect between upstream and downstream that we have to cross. For example, upstream culture tends to be more focused on innovating, getting a number of changes and moving fast, while the downstream culture tends to focus more on maintaining quality, stability, and uptime of the application or services that you provide. Upstream, we're adopting more agile practices. Downstream, there's still a prevalence of legacy practices. When we talk tools and technology, we're seeing a space where open source is dominating the market. People are quickly and rapidly adopting point solutions. And downstream, we're still seeing a focus on the traditional enterprise class tools procured through a corporate procurement process, tying back to that cultural focus on stability. So what we need to figure out how to do is how do we cross these chasms? And I'm going to make the argument that based on the industry data and based on a recognition of these chasms that exist in legacy or mature software organizations, we could divide the problem space into 4 quadrants. The lower 2 quadrants, quadrant 1 and 2, represent the team level or work group level path from definition to operation. With quadrant 1 being an organization that practices team level agile or agile upstream, quadrant 2 being organizations that have managed to adopt team level continuous integration across one or a few teams, a quadrant 3 company being a company that has scaled their agile upstream practices across multiple work groups into the enterprise, and agile is practiced on most to all teams. A quadrant 4 organization being an organization that has codified those agile upstream and downstream practices across their entire organization. So to drill down a little bit further into this concept, we'll take a look at some of the characteristics of a company in each of these quadrants. So for instance, if we look at a quadrant 1 company, a quadrant 1 company will tend to have 1 to a few teams that have adopted agile development practices. However, they've probably individually deployed continuous integration, and they have only team level tools integration between sort of the processes that happen to the left in the business and any connectivity to the downstream on the right. They have team level project management and development practices, and you can usually identify a quadrant 1 organization by the fact that they practice a water scrum fall approach. And one of the reasons for this is not only do we have the chasm between upstream and downstream, but traditionally the people that orchestrate the definition, planning, coding, building, testing, and other phases of SDLC not only sometimes have different priorities, but they are actually organizationally separated, and they report to different managers. They have different budgets. So what you will find is people will tend to do what they can to modernize and influence the area they can with the least resistance. So we often see that dev adopts Scrum practices within the code and build, but they resist the impedance that they're going to encounter when they try to affect or influence that change across the organizational silos. In quadrant 2, let's get back to quadrant 2 here. In quadrant 2, we start to see some improvement, right? We see some or a few teams that have specific applications supported by agile downstream practices such as agile test, dynamic provisioning of environments, infrastructure as code. Teams have begun to cross that chasm to extend continuous integration to continuous delivery. But the problem is these implementations and any ops alignment are usually project-specific one-offs. So we haven't determined how to scale that across multiple teams and codify that as part of our practices. When we look at quadrant 3, which is where a lot of companies are today, we've scaled our agile development practices across the organization. We've started to embark on business alignment with agile specification and iterative development, but we still have team-level dev tools supporting the development and delivery process, and we still only have team-level tools integrations. As we move on to quadrant 4, where we're recognizing that innovation, fast time to market, we see standardization on tools and process for things like automated test and deployment, dynamically provisioned environment, containers, infrastructure as code. What's also interesting, though, is that the business and the customers have been brought along with this iterative process for agile definition, development, and delivery. And in our organization, we've begun to embody a culture of collaboration, learning, and innovation. Okay, so that's to set the stage for the quadrants, which Sunil will review. I now want to take an opportunity to walk you through the path that Intuit took in pursuing enterprise adoption of the Cloudbased Jenkins platform to build CI and CD as a service across the organization. And I attribute this content and the work that they did to Wen Gu of Intuit, who is now at Twitter. So first, some background. When Intuit decided they wanted to implement enterprise CI and CD as a service, there were specific business drivers that inspired the initiative. With Intuit, they had a One Intuit initiative where they wanted to transform from a product-centric company where you had separated teams, separated knowledge bases and knowledge stores delivering each of the product lines such as TurboTax or QuickBooks, and realign it to be an experience-centric company where instead of looking at a specific product, you were looking at consumer products, small business products, and enterprise products, and therefore the customer experience, say for a consumer product or personal product such as TurboTax, would be more aligned across the entire Intuit portfolio, instead of getting a different experience depending on which product you use. This required cross-business unit integration that didn't exist on a tools and technology, process, or cultural tier at this point. They figured that the best place to start was going to be with enterprise CI and CD. And their drivers were focused, not only on, do we want to adopt DevOps, but rather how do we connect people or our employees? How do we align our products? And how do we do that such that it improves our profit for our shareholders? And so they define some goals. One is, the driving mantra is we need to support the overall corporate goal of a One Intuit and this realignment. In order to do this, they sought to establish leadership at a central level because at the end of the day, you needed somebody mediating or driving that had a cross-functional and cross-team perspective. They figured the lowest hanging fruit, sort of the foundation for the transformation, would be to improve the adoption of CI and CD and DevOps practices across the entire enterprise. And in order to do that, they had to win goodwill, and they had to start at grassroots and solve the problem for the developers such that they provided a reliable, high quality, and consistent infrastructure that developers would trust and ultimately use, and that would act as the connective tissue for the development teams to take us across business units. So our journey was focused on first things first. Start with alignment. And this is one of the things that I can't emphasize enough based on my practices. All too often, a specific portion of that delivery process or the organization with good intent starts off on their own to begin to improve processes. But as I like to say, whether we're a business analyst, a developer, or an operations engineer, we are all part of the business, and at the end of the day, our activities and the output of those activities need to be aligned with the business. So align with the business, align with stakeholders across the development lifecycle to be sure that you guys have common objectives and you define a common path to that. Next, you want to look to build a team, and that team needs to consist of sort of your central team that is helping drive the transformation, as well as all the stakeholders that are affected by the transformation. Everybody needs a seat at the table at the beginning of the process, again, so you can align on expectations and shared objectives. The next step was to select pilot teams. I know oftentimes you'll find that in a shared tools and technology service, we like to start the transformation sort of within the vacuum as a skunkworks project within a non-production team. There are some benefits to that, but the disadvantages are, one, it's in a clean room environment. Two, doing it in that clean room environment, so you're taking the happy path. Second, doing it in a clean room environment means you're not inherently sharing knowledge and developing support and buy-in. So it's important to select a pilot team that is a production team that ideally has a low risk and high reward product that they are going to deliver. So you can experiment, you can fail, adjust, and learn without compromising the business, but yet that is balanced by the central oversight so they can address things in light of production needs and production concerns. You also should look to select a range of teams, different team size, different technology, different hosting model. So Intuit chose 2 SaaS teams, 2 microservices teams, 2 mobile teams focused on iOS, 2 mobile teams focused on Android, and 2 platform teams, so that they were sort of vetting out the full experience across technology stacks, across BUs, and across cultures. Once they selected the pilot teams, they needed to identify some starting metrics and use those to establish key metrics that they would measure to see if they were improving or making progress. The top engineering metrics were the availability of the platform that they would use. So kind of, if we're using the shared infrastructure, is it reliable and accessible? They also wanted to measure the number of builds. We want to deliver better software faster and with less incident. Going back to Mike's slides, we want to go from 12 to 18 months to 2 to 4 months to ultimately make software delivery a zero event. One of the starting metrics that we could track there was number of builds that were happening per application. But when we looked at those goals via business metrics, we also then extend that and look at cycle time, right? How long does it take to go from definition or user story to delivery of that user story? And then in consideration of that cycle time, how often can teams release? If we're able to have shorter cycle times and release more frequently, we're meeting that goal of getting to market faster to maintain our competitive advantage. So what were some of the challenges that they faced? Well, as we said, they faced the challenges of culture, technology, and process. When it came to cultural challenges, there was a resistance to the idea of a cultural corporate technology group. And they had to navigate the feeling that it might be a top-down mandate where they would take control versus sharing a platform. And there was fear of loss of that control and the fact that by handing off their resources or their platform to a central team, they would move too fast or too slow. They addressed that by ensuring that they took a collaborative approach, they innovated incrementally, and developed trust and respect with the stakeholders. That trust and respect then built perseverance. So look, everything was not going to be perfect out of the box, but based on the trust and respect and the involvement in the innovation through collaboration, that built a culture of perseverance as they iterated through problems. Their process challenge was a concern that one size doesn't fit all, right? And also, what is the scope? Does CD apply to every team? Certain teams have different processes, they have different disciplines. And the approach to solve this was to start with a value stream-based design of the process, first at each team, and then merging the value stream per team so that they could standardize as much as possible, but respect the fact that they would need to divert where needed because teams legitimately have their own technology, process, as well as cultural needs. So when we take a look at the enterprise model, what they established is that for some teams they would have CI, which would go from build to varying levels of integration test with deploy and smoke, to manual and automated test, and then CD, which would encompass the entire life cycle. So going from build with things like unit test and quality scans to deploy and smoke test, manual test and automatic test, and ultimately deployment all the way out to production and test in a production-like environment. And they needed to support mandatory gates and application team defined gates and be able to do all of this in a way that was consistent, reproducible, and traceable. And their technology challenges were largely focused on, in a large mature organization, there are inherent differences. And they needed to be able to account for those differences and begin to align teams on best of breed tools and proven industry best practices with support of open source, but not only open source, but open communication, so that they can arrive at the best balance of a standardized platform and some lowest common denominator standardized practices while still supporting and respecting the differences in the team. And to sort of highlight those challenges, you can see that there's different application types, languages, build frameworks, test frameworks, deployment frameworks, hosting needs, etc. And all of these, as they were supported or deployed by the Central Tools and Technology Group on the Enterprise CD platform, needed to be secure, scalable, trustworthy, and reliable, yet still support the one Intuit goal of standardization across business units. So they proceeded with the process, and they were able to recognize some pretty powerful outcomes across the various business drivers that they had for people, product, and profit. A very interesting one, again, that I think is often not focused on, but extremely important, is that from the people standpoint, a KPI they ended up measuring was what was the employee satisfaction rate. Literally within weeks of onboarding teams into the common CD as a CI and CD as a service platform, their engagement or employee satisfaction score went up 15%. From a product standpoint, they were able to identify via the established metrics that they were able to deliver software with shorter, faster cycle times and more frequently without compromising reliability. And then ultimately for their shareholders, the common platform allowed them to save on licensing cost, administration cost, and infrastructure cost, as well as to be able to deliver faster. They found that they could improve their process as opposed to scaling headcount. And they've identified that by using Jenkins as the tools and technology platform that provided the orchestration backbone, they saw some benefits such as the quality and expansibility of Jenkins, enterprise plugins which supported security and isolation that the teams needed via folders and RBAC, the ability to increase reliability via long-running jobs, high availability and backup, and the ability to provide an SLA, what is really a production SLA, what became a mission-critical production platform with support from Cloudbased. As they move forward, they sought to leverage more of the enterprise features, such as the API integration and license management, to scale the implementation across teams. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Sunil to build on the Intuit implementation in the Four Quadrants and provide you guidance on how they can help you implement this in the real world.
Thank you, Brian. Hopefully you can see the slides. So what Mike started the webinar with was the motivation for DevOps, and Brian followed up with a great framework that can be used for implementing a DevOps journey. What I would like to spend the next few minutes on are some practical implementation strategies for DevOps. What does it really mean, and what are the ground realities? So DevOps is it's not a monolithic concept. It's got several moving parts, and it works best when all the different aspects are taken care of. So what that implies really is that DevOps can get complicated too soon, and hence it is important to evaluate where one is in the DevOps journey and what should be the guardrails that should be maintained to have a great journey. Specifically, I think it's an assessment that's required that would address some key aspects of DevOps. And if you look at the assessment, it really needs to cover things like where are you today and what are your 3-month goals and what are your 6-month goals. Are you aware of your infrastructure requirements? How are your environments set up today? What is your org structure? Does it help or does it hinder a DevOps implementation? What are your existing tools in your tool chain, and do they need to be revamped to the latest set of tool chains to implement a DevOps strategy? And later on, I'll show you an actual assessment that will actually help you define some of the, get answers to some of these and put you in a specific Cloudbased DevOps quadrant. So Brian did give an excellent overview of the Cloudbased DevOps quadrant, and what you see here is a glimpse of the actual specific implementation or implementation implications for each quadrant. This is, of course, a generic version, and through an assessment, we can easily derive the specific recommendations for each of the quadrants. So as an idea, you would see that if you are in the team agile quadrant at the bottom left, what one could benefit from is are some strategies around, and the assessment would help them kind of figure out, okay, do we need a workshop or do we need a jumpstart program, which helps you kind of build a proof of concept of CI and CD, so that you can really see your maturity level in each of these quadrants and what should be your next steps that you should take on. Or if you're on the top right corner, which is the area where everyone aspires to be, here you can really leverage some of the more advanced concepts of DevOps and have very well-defined templates and accelerator frameworks that can actually help you take your DevOps even further, your DevOps from where you are at that point of time. And specifically, if you look at DevOps journey, there are 2 parts to it. One is if you are in a particular quadrant, as an assessment would identify. One part is how do you mature in that quadrant further, and then the second part is really how do you move from one quadrant to the other, which is an adoption strategy. So what you see here as an example is that if you're in Team Agile, or if you aspire to be in Team Agile, you could actually take care of some of the basic concepts like assessment, coded pipelines, etc., or even SMEs who could be part of your team who can actually help evangelize what should be the best practices that are needed across the enterprise. And if you want to move, let's say, from enterprise agile to enterprise DevOps, that is the top left corner to the top right corner, you can really now take the advantage of some of the more detailed advanced concepts in DevOps to actually take it further to that level. So depending on where you are, a definition of your journey is also defined in terms of the kind of tools that will actually help you take that. Now the next slide will actually show you a different kind of a journey that you could actually take. You could decide that, okay, you are in Team CD, which is the bottom right corner, where you have a very matured deployment set up in your organization. You may decide that, okay, this is a good time to actually go into Enterprise Agile, which is to have federated CI across your entire organization, and what should really be your focus to actually go from that to the next strategy. So what Quadrants allows you to do is to have you kind of decide what maturity level you are in the particular cycle of a DevOps journey, and that also defines what the adoption strategy should be to move from one quadrant to the other. And at this point, I'd like to actually show you, this is just a snapshot of what an actual assessment is, but I'll quickly kind of show you how the assessment program is run, so that'll give you a good feel for the assessment. So give me a moment. So I believe you can see the assessment spreadsheet. And what we have here essentially is a list of questions which we would walk a prospect or a customer through, and the questions are actually organized top to bottom in terms of different quadrants, and this is answered by a prospect or practitioner in the organization, and as a result of the answers or responses given to each of these questions, which are very specific implementation level questions, what ends up is that the organization gets mapped into particular quadrants. For example, in this particular setup, you can see that it seems that the organization is pretty mature in Team Agile and Team Level CD. And based on this, we could give further recommendations and say what should really they be deploying further to kind of further their movement on in the DevOps journey. So if I make a change, for example, let's say that the answer to this question is, do you actually integrate code from several developers at least once a day? And the answer is no. you can see that the DevOps quadrant that the customer is right now is marked as amber, which essentially means that they have some aspects of Team Agile in place, but they really could do more to actually mature. And the recommendations that come up based on that level would actually indicate, if I click on recommendations, it will real time indicate as to what should be their implementation strategies for each of these levels. Now, obviously, this is not to indicate that everything that's in here should be implemented. The idea is that you can take some aspects of this concept of Team Agile Advanced, for example, and start implementing it, and then move along the journey. So this can be used in multiple different in facets, and actually this gives you a very easy way to decide where you are and what should really be the next step that you could take in the next 6 weeks to actually mature yourself in a particular quadrant. With that, just move back to the slide. Okay. So hopefully that gave you an idea of how an assessment can help you help indicate where you are in a particular quadrant and then take further. And then using the motivation that Mike mentioned and the actual DevOps concept, quadrant concept that Brian mentioned, I think we have a very clear path to actually implementing concepts to ideas, and you can really embrace that pretty soon.
Great. Thank you, all three of you, for that outstanding presentation. And we have some questions and answers, or at least some questions, and hopefully you guys have some answers. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left before we have to close out the webinar. So why don't we go ahead and take some questions now if you guys are ready for me.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So the first question we have is from Rahul, who asked, what is the level of automation in the continuous integration, continuous delivery space for mobile projects that you see in the market? And then he asked, are customers moving to licensed products in this space or relying more on open source options?
Yeah, so this is Mike. I'll jump in here first and then let the other guys comment. We're definitely seeing a desire for automation around mobile with CI/CD, but as far as the implementations go, they're still a bit few and far between. One of the challenges is that the mobile OSs to truly automate on top of them, whether it be automating on a mobile app or automating on a mobile web experience, it's not exactly normalized. And so if it's the mobile web, if I build everything in a way that I can kind of attach to the DOM, attach my automation things to the DOM, I can automate there a bit, but I have to build it the right way. And that includes all the JavaScript libraries and everything that I use. For an app, it gets a little bit easier because both Xcode and Android Studio afford us an option to attach kind of testing frameworks that we can use for CI/CD. But with all the differences across the individual OSs and across apps to web, that's what's really holding folks back because the tooling that we currently use is still a little bit brittle, such that as we change the front end, oftentimes we have to rewrite or rebuild some of the automation that we've already done, and therefore the ROI goes down pretty significantly.
And I can jump in quickly just to add a couple more things on that. So mobile definitely has been late to the game to adopt DevOps. But what we have seen and a couple of implementations that we are doing, we've been able to successfully implement a coded pipeline for mobile, for iOS and Android applications. And I think what we have learned over a period of time is the tools are now kind of evolving itself to kind of be linked to orchestrators like Enterprise Jenkins or even open source. I think what we learned is it is helpful to have template pipelines created for each different operating system that can be leveraged across, because each has its own idiosyncrasies, and that is more prevalent in mobile probably than the other platform. But definitely there is automation that exists today for DevOps in mobile.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for the answer. I've got a question here from Ken, and Michael, I believe this one is directed at you. Normalization was mentioned, and actually you just mentioned it again, but how do you see this goal across different languages and environments such as COBOL, Java, EE, and Force.com?
Yeah, great question and a challenge. And so it comes down to how do we do that? Obviously it's incredibly difficult to normalize across languages, and so therefore then we try to normalize across the output of those languages, the binary output or otherwise. And so that's why we're seeing, across the back ends, so many folks implementing RESTful API architectures. So regardless of what language we use, we have RESTful API endpoints, and we can kind of normalize there. So that when I showed you the slide that had the bridge in the middle, we can normalize that left-hand side, all those disparate things behind REST. So that solves the left-hand side. And the right-hand side kind of goes to what we just touched on, which is, how do you automate when all these things are built so differently? And so we're still working there, and as was mentioned, there's starting to become some mechanisms by which we can kind of abstract away the nuances of Android versus iOS and the nuances of web implementation to web implementation. But the front end is still lagging a little bit behind the back end. So I don't see the normalization coming language to language, but instead, at an output perspective and at a kind of an architectural perspective.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'd like to chime in if I may,
Sure.
Shirley.
Absolutely.
Look, it is, as Mike said, there are inherent challenges in achieving continuous delivery and continuous deployment on a single plane, even something with smaller and newer content such as mobile or SaaS. But it is doable. It may be painful at times. I would say it needs to be done incrementally, not in a big bang manner. And we should also, be aware that at various paces, progress has been made in all of the languages and environments and technologies that you mentioned. I would recommend a couple of things. First, if you do know that you plan to normalize this process across different stacks, then you need to identify where you standardize and where you divert. You need to select tools that normalize, as Mike said, that output in an agnostic way and allow you to, at least for that output, the binary and delivery and testing and delivery of those binaries, allow you to establish a supply chain methodology. Then begin to sort of plug in the lowest hanging fruit, right? Your greenfield SaaS application. Learn best practices from that. Then go reach out to your full Java stack team and start to begin to integrate them on that process and deviate to make it fit and continue to scale that across the organization, learning and adjusting incrementally as you move along.
Great. Thank you, Brian, for adding that. I appreciate it. I'm sure the audience does as well. And unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for the questions. If you if you submitted a question and did not get your answer, I'm sure the panelists will be more than happy to address your questions offline. So with that, I would like to thank Michael, Brian, and Sunil for taking part in today's webinar. Again, please feel free to check on devops.com for an archived version of this webinar, probably starting tomorrow about the same time. And also check the website for upcoming webinars that we have planned. But for now, thank you very much for attending today's webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon signing off.